Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the DAV podcast. I'm Matt Saintsing, and if you're listening to this, congratulations, you found us once again. But to make sure you never miss an episode, make sure you are hitting subscribe. Today's episode is a conversation my colleague Brian Buckwalter has with Sebastian Junger. Sebastian is an author of many books, including most recently Freedom, and of course Tribe, which is an exploration of the communities that you and I and other people join and live, where we share resources and ultimately risk life to protect one another. That's something I think veterans can definitely get a lot out of. Sebastian's also a documentarian. He's a filmmaker who's responsible for such films as Restrepo, which is an account of an American infantry platoon at a remote outpost in Afghanistan at the height of the war. He made that documentary with the late war documentarian and journalist Tim Hetherington. The conversation you're about to hear Brian have with Sebastian really stretches across many topics, but really focuses on the civilian-military divide and what veterans can learn from one another within groups and intra-group as well. Sebastian brings a unique perspective. He's not a military veteran himself, but he has spent a lot of time within these circles, and I think the knowledge that he has to share is really beneficial. So without further ado, I bring you Brian Buckwalter and Sebastian Junger.
I'm Brian Buckwalter with DAV, and I'm joined by Sebastian Junger. Sebastian is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of The Perfect Storm, Fire, A Death in Belmont, War, Tribe, and Freedom. As an award-winning journalist, a contributing editor to Vanity Fair, and a special correspondent at ABC News, he has covered major international news stories around the world and has received both a National Magazine Award and a Peabody Award. Sebastian is also a documentary filmmaker whose debut film, Restrepo, a feature-length documentary co-directed with Tim Hetherington, was nominated for an Academy Award and won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance. Restrepo, which chronicled the deployment of a platoon of U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan, is widely considered to have broken new ground in war reporting. Sebastian and Tim are the 2011 recipients of DAV's Bugle Award. This award recognizes the outstanding contributions of members of the media in support of disabled veterans. Sadly, this was a posthumous award honor for Tim, who was killed on April 11, 2011, while covering the Libyan civil war. Sebastian is also the founder and director of Vets Town Hall. Sebastian, thanks so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. I enjoy talking about all this. So thank you.
Yeah, I do want to dive into your book, Tribe. I know it's not your most recent book, which is Freedom, but Tribe was really a fascinating look into how humans were essentially designed to be tribal creatures, living in close proximity to each other and working together for survival. But you say in your book that the United States has largely moved away from this way of life, right? And how so?
Yeah, I mean, we're so, I'll put it even more strongly, not only are we tribal creatures, we're social primates, right?
Mm.
And as social primates, as humans, we are uniquely vulnerable in the natural world. We don't have long claws, we don't have sharp teeth, we can't climb trees, we can't run very fast. We get our strength and really our dominance from our ability to speak and relate with one another and form close groups and make sacrifices for one another. It's something that very few other mammals do, and it makes us dominant in the world. The problem, modern society, is that it has solved almost all the survival problems. Like that is now its survival problem in a weird, ironic way. We don't need each other in close proximity to go to the supermarket and buy food, to have a roof over our heads, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, we might not even know personally all the people that built the things and grew the things that we depend on for our survival. That's a completely new circumstance in human society, and it's an amazing liberation from the tyranny of the group. But it also, there's an emotional impoverishment that comes with it that can be really crippling to people. And so, what I would say is that when people feel ill at ease, when they feel alienated, when they feel depressed, when they feel suicidal, whether you're a combat veteran or not, it doesn't matter. This is affecting everybody.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things you may be suffering from isn't your own particular mental illness. It may be, in a weird way, a kind of healthy response to the sort of asocial stresses of the society that we've built.
Yeah, you've essentially said that people can walk through their entire lives completely lonely, surrounded by people. I mean, that's sort of what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, I mean, we live in a society of strangers, and that would be okay if we also lived clustered in small groups of people that we sort of knew really well and depended on. But
Mhm.
I mean, I grew up in a sort of like middle class suburb, right? I mean, we didn't depend. Every family had their own home, and
Mhm.
we didn't depend on the other families for our survival. My dad had a job, and we had a car, and whatever. We didn't need anybody. And when you don't need other people, it's hard for you yourself to feel needed. And when humans don't feel needed, they get depressed. One of the reasons that when people retire, they get depressed and sometimes suicidal is that it's clear that society doesn't need their services anymore. When soldiers come back from a deployment, whether they were in actual combat or not, most soldiers actually were not in combat, but it doesn't matter. They were in a close, supportive environment where they were very much needed by the other men and women in the platoon they were in, and all engaged in this thing that's much bigger than themselves. And then they come back to the society and they don't appear to be needed by anyone. And in fact, the government, in all of its sort of like good intentions, is all too willing to say, you know what, you have 100% disability. We will bankroll the rest of your life. The subtext there of a 100% disability, service connected disability, is the subtext, unfortunately, is we don't need you. The nation can get by without you, right? Which is the wrong message to send to anybody. And so, how do we take care of our veterans in the very real ways that they need, but not inadvertently send this message of you're now superfluous. You can live in your parents' basement and watch TV, and it doesn't matter. Like, we're good. And that if you want to create a depressed alcoholic who will start thinking about suicide, like, that's a pretty good way to do it. So that's the needle that we have to thread as a society.
And you've seen this tribal connection that service members have deployed firsthand. What did you see? Was it something that you weren't expecting, or did you kind of have an idea going into it? What was it like to be, I don't know if an outsider is the right word, because you probably became part of the tribe at some point, but what was it like in that situation, experience what service members see on deployment?
Well, yeah, I mean, I started as an outsider, and by halfway through the deployment, I'd gotten my share of bumps and scrapes over there as well, and was sort of included in the platoon on virtually every level, other than that I wasn't carrying a weapon, which would cross a journalistic boundary. So, but I mean, it was sort of intoxicating. I was like, wow, this is what it feels like to belong to a group. And I don't mean a football team and everyone goes home at the end of practice, right? I mean a group where you're bunking together, you're sharing your meals together, you're doing everything together. And that feeling is, for me, is sort of encapsulated by what one of the soldiers said to me, a guy named Brendan, who I am still very, very close to. He said, he was sort of marveling. He was like, it's amazing. There's guys in the platoon who straight up hate each other,
Hmm.
but we would all die for each other. The amazing thing about that kind of fraternity in combat is that it doesn't depend on how you feel. It
Hmm.
depends on your shared recognition. You're all part of a group, and the group is bigger and larger and more important than you individually are, and that you must be prepared to make sacrifices for that group. And in return, the group will make sacrifices for you. And it doesn't depend on feelings. It's a question of loyalty. And the only time that I've seen that arise spontaneously in civilian society is during a crisis, during a hurricane or a tornado or a flood, or, as I looked at in my book Tribe, the Blitz in London during World War II.
Right.
Class differences disappeared. Everyone pitched in. Those who didn't pitch in were ostracized. And there was what was described at the time as a kind of social utopia, where people were evaluated by their efforts towards the common good, rather than how much money they were born with, or what title came after their name, or what have you.
Yeah. And, tying this back to kind of the service member returning from deployment, it's something that I think all of us who've ever been deployed have seen. It's almost like a culture shock coming home. You come home, you've been into this environment that is completely different than society as you remember it. So it's like a culture shock coming back to the United States, and then you kind of feel disconnected, I think, from the community around you. I mean, it fades over time,
Right.
But the thank yous for your service and all this stuff, almost it's hard to connect with that. But I think that's where like you're starting to see this like divide between civilians and military, because there's not like a connection, that a shared connection. You mentioned that in just a few seconds ago.
Well, yeah, I mean, in all circumstances, people affiliate with other people that they've shared experiences with. So people who were in prison together feel affiliated with other prisoners. People who went to a certain college together or on a certain football team, likewise. I mean, it could be good things or bad, but when you share experiences, you deepen connection. And so what happens with soldiers is that they share experiences overseas and they come back in the country that they fought to defend. The vast majority did not share those experiences. And so there's a lack of connection. And, I think during the sort of more all-encompassing wars of, say, World War II, for example, okay, the country wasn't in combat, but I mean, Pearl Harbor was attacked, right? And mainland America in some ways. I mean, it was the state of Hawaii, but also there were enormous sacrifices by the populace during World War II. And so that did make it feel like somewhat of a shared experience. Not true now, right? A much smaller military than World War II. And the consequences were not at all borne even by taxpayers. I mean, it all was sort of, as I understand, put on a kind of national credit card, and the debt, we basically increased the debt rather than pay it down at the time. So it's understandable that soldiers feel unconnected to the society they come back to, which is a pity for everybody. It's a pity for the soldiers and for the civilians.
And so what do you think is maybe the problem, like, or the potential problem from that divide, like from that lack of common understanding, or like you mentioned, like the shared public meaning in the Israeli military forces. You talk about World War II and trauma, but is there a problem that's going to start arising if we don't reverse this or somehow address this issue as a country?
Well, it's very hard the natural human group, based on sort of anthropological studies, is 40, 50 people, 100 people, to a couple hundred people maybe. I mean, that's the sort of like maximum group that you can emotionally affiliate with. Beyond that, it starts to fracture a little bit. And we are doing something, and by we I mean sort of modern nations are doing something unheard of in human evolution, which is to deliberately, consciously create groups of hundreds of millions of people. So how do you keep those hundreds of millions feeling invested in and willing to sacrifice for a common goal? It's very, very hard, right? I mean, that my shared values with you are not obvious. I mean, we might share values and goals, but I don't know, right? I mean, you're another American, so theoretically we do, but I don't know that on a personal level. If we went camping for 10 days, I might start to feel it more personally, or we're in some situation of hardship, like I might feel it more personally, but right now it's totally abstract. So how do you do that? I think the fracture that veterans feel when they come back is a symptom of a larger problem, which is a general fracturing in this society. There's fractures between the races, between economic groups, but between political parties. There's fractures on every conceivable level. And, it's dangerous and it's sad, and it really flies in the face of a very profound and beautiful American ideal. I don't know how to solve that. I mean, boy, I wish I did. I wish somebody did, right? But, one thing I think we can do is create a sort of a form of ritual that binds soldiers back into society when they come back. Now, every society in the world has had to deal with the threat of violence and with the reality of warfare, virtually every society. And when you train people, and in most cases it's men, when you train men, young men, to kill and to defend each other with their lives, when you train them in that way, and then you bring them back to the softer environment of society and women and children and everything else that they fought to defend, when you bring them back, you have to kind of psychologically decommission them. And tribal societies do this very effectively. So one of the things I looked at was the gourd ceremony that was practiced by some of the tribes of the Great Plains, of the Southern Great Plains in the United States. And basically what they would do is they would bring the warriors back from combat, and each warrior would have the chance to sing or dance or perform or retell what he did to protect his community, his tribe, on the battlefield, who he killed. I mean, I'm sure a lot of it was sort of boasting, right? But what he did so not only is that cathartic for the warrior, but it allows / forces the rest of the community to participate morally in the violence that was conducted on their behalf. So when you bring American soldiers back from overseas and allow them to speak to their community, maybe a similar thing could happen. And that's how we came up with something called Vets Town Hall, where you open up town halls on Veterans Day. It doesn't have to be Veterans Day, but there's a nice sort of symbolism there. And it's not open for other business on Veterans Day. It's open for use. Or for this organization. You open it up on Veterans Day, you turn on the PA system, and you allow veterans from any war who served in any capacity. I don't care if you were a supply clerk in Korea, it doesn't matter. You serve this nation in uniform. You have the right, the opportunity to speak for 10 minutes about what it felt like. And some veterans are going to be absolutely furious that they had to fight the war that we all sent them to fight, right? Some vets are going to be very proud. Some vets are going to be so sad, grieving so profoundly at the brothers and sisters that they may have lost, that they won't even really be able to speak very well at all. But all of that is the experience of war, the consequences of war. And then that starts to integrate, starts to bind communities to themselves. And when you bind communities, you start to bind the nation. And that's my great hope for this. Not only that will it help vets, in the long run, it'll help the nation. Because if the nation is psychically ill, veterans will never recover from their particular wounds of war.
No, yeah. I know that this is such an important conversation to have. Like you said, I mean, it's cathartic, it's healing, it's binding. How do we get people interested on both sides? I think there might be a tendency to not want to confront. We want to feel good, and sometimes you might not feel comfortable with having these conversations. But how do we get people engaged on this? What are you seeing with these vets town halls and the ones that have happened and the ones coming up?
Well, the wonderful thing about reality is that it flies in the face of all political ideology. So no matter where you are on the political spectrum, if you go to one of these events, you will be hearing things from veterans, from the heroes, as it were, that fly in the face of what you assume politically to be true. And if you're a like diehard patriot, Republican, blah, 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 you're going to hear veterans, people that you admire, right, saying, God damn the war you made us fight. You know what I mean? And then if I grew up in a very liberal environment, very anti-war, very pacifist, you could be someone from like my political community that is faced with the prospect of a young person saying, serving in the military and deploying overseas saved my life. Like, I was a mess before that, and now I'm a productive citizen. Thank you, U.S. Army, or whatever. And the great blessing of this is it gets people to give up some of their ideology. And of course, ideology is what's going to kill this country politically, socially, economically, morally. Ideology will kill it dead. And I say that equally. I happen to be a Democrat. I see that equally about my people as about Republicans. And we have to break that down. And I do feel that veterans who drop their political beliefs in combat instantly, right? No one cares if they're fighting next to a Democrat or Republican, or if they're gay or straight or God knows what. Like, they really don't care. And that in that example, our nation may save itself.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, oftentimes when you go to war, you're fighting for the person to the left or right. You're not necessarily fighting for the grander reason. I think that's maybe something that some people don't realize, that it's, like you said, there's very little judgment or talking about ideology in those moments. So again, Sebastian, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian, for that excellent interview. And you can find Sebastian at sebastianjunger.com. From there, you'll have access to all of his work, including Tribe and Freedom. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, follow, and share this episode with a friend, perhaps. And one more reminder that if you're a veteran in need, or if you know of one, DAV benefits advocates are just a few clicks away. Please reach out. Please go to dav.org or benefitsquestions.org. That's benefitsquestions, all one word.org. Sebastian and Brian were part of a panel last year on DAV's Distinguished Speaker Series with Harvard Law School. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. So if you want to learn all about the William Hale Legal Services Center of Harvard Law School, you can go to legalservicescenter.org. Again, I'm Matt Saint-Sing. Thanks for listening, and until next time.